The hum of the industrial floor buffer was a steady, almost comforting drone, a metallic lullaby that sang me through the quiet hours. My name's Alex, and my office is, well, an office. Specifically, the Sterling Tower downtown, from midnight to 8 a.m. It's been, 3 months now? Feels longer, like the artificial light of the fluorescent tubes has permanently bleached a patch of my memory. My training was less a structured program and more a hurried, mumbled tour from a guy named Marco, whose primary goal seemed to be clocking out before the last trace of sunlight vanished from the sky. Here's the bucket, here's the mop, here's the key card. Don't touch the big boss's desk on the 32nd. And for God's sake, don't track mud in the lobby, Alex. Management's a stickler. That was about the gist of it. He'd shown me the basic routes, how to dump the trash, where the spare paper towels were, and then he was gone, a phantom in the twilight. Left me with a list of floors and a silence so thick you could carve it with a butter knife. Most nights, it's just me and the building. A living, breathing concrete behemoth that snores softly with the sigh of its HVAC system. The Sterling Tower isn't ancient, not by a long shot. All glass and brushed steel, built in the late 90s, I think, but it's got that aged smell, a mix of stale coffee, industrial cleaning solvents, and something else, something indefinable, like old paperbacks left in an attic. It's not unpleasant, just quiet, like the building itself is holding its breath. My routine is a dance. First, the lobby, polished granite floors, reflecting the muted security lights like a dark mirror. Then, the first set of floors, usually 10 to 20, done with the quick sweep and wipe. I push my cleaning cart, a rattling contraption of plastic and metal, down the hushed corridors. The wheels squeak a little, an embarrassing sound in the profound stillness, but it's the only sound I make for hours. The offices are mostly identical, cubicles stretching out like empty beehives, occasionally punctuated by a framed photo of a smiling family or a motivational quote tacked to a partition. Everything's left exactly as it was when the last wage slave clocked out, a silent promise of their return. Papers stacked, coffee mugs drying on desks, ergonomic chairs angled just so. It's like peeking into 1,000 private lives, frozen in amber. Tonight, I was on the 17th floor, tackling a particularly stubborn smudge on a glass partition in the accounting department. I was elbow deep in Windex, the sharp, almost acrid smell cutting through the building's usual aroma, when it happened. The Sterling Tower has 4 main passenger elevators, gleaming silver doors that usually sit dormant from about 9 p.m. until 6 a.m. Then there's the service elevator, tucked away down a narrow, less trafficked corridor near the loading dock bay on the ground floor. It's bigger, utilitarian, its steel doors scuffed and bearing the scars of countless deliveries. Marco had explicitly told me, "Service elevators usually lock down after 10, Alex. Big Boss doesn't like the noise. Stick to the passenger ones if you need to go higher than the 20th. Otherwise, just take the stairs for a floor or two. Good for the cardio, eh?" I'd nodded, of course. Not like I ever needed the service elevator anyway. My cleaning cart fits in the passenger ones just fine, and I don't haul anything heavier than a bucket of soapy water. But as I buffed the glass, humming an off-key tune to myself, a sound sliced through the quiet. Not the familiar whoosh of the passenger elevators engaging, nor the distant rumble of the freight trucks outside. This was different. It was a chime, soft, almost musical, like a bell from an old church. And it came from the direction of the service elevator bank. My rag paused mid-swipe. I straightened up, craning my neck, listening. Nothing. Just the faint, rhythmic whir of the building's air conditioning. I shook my head. Probably just the Windex fumes getting to me. Or maybe the old wiring that Marco had mentioned offhandedly during my tour. This building had a lot of quirks, he'd said. mostly harmless. I went back to the smudge, scrubbing a little harder. Another minute passed, maybe 2, and then it came again. Clearer this time. Ding dong. Just like a doorbell, but echoing with that distinct, hollow reverberation that only an empty elevator shaft can produce. It was definitely the service elevator. The little digital display above its scarred steel doors, which should have been dark, flickered just for a second. A quick, almost imperceptible flash of light behind the dusty numbers. Then it was gone, leaving the display blank as before. I walked over, slowly, my cleaning cart trailing behind me like a nervous shadow. The corridor was dim, only emergency lights cutting through the gloom. The service elevator doors sat there, impassive, reflective. Nothing moved. No light, no sound. I reached out, my fingers hovering an inch from the cold steel. It felt still, silent, completely inert. Had I imagined it? The chime, the flicker? My brain, sleep-deprived and accustomed to monotony, could be playing tricks. Overnight shifts do that to you. You start seeing things in the shadows, hearing whispers in the AC vents. I decided to just ignore it. Marco said it was locked down, out of service for the night. That was the rule. And rules, especially in a place like this, were there to be followed. Still, as I pushed my cart away, heading towards the stairwell to make my way down to the next set of floors, I glanced back. For a split second, I could swear I saw a faint green arrow pointing up on the service elevator's display before it winked out, plunging the steel doors back into their unyielding darkness. It was probably just residual power, I told myself. A glitch in the old system. Nothing to worry about. Just a silent, sleeping giant of a building. But as I descended the echoing concrete stairs, the faint, lingering echo of that impossible chime seemed to follow me. A subtle disharmony in the building's otherwise perfect silence, suggesting that perhaps not all things here were as dormant as they seemed, and that some rules might be more than just suggestions. The next night, the chime from the service elevator was still rattling around in my head, a pebble in a shoe you can't quite shake off. I found myself unconsciously listening for it as I methodically vacuumed the plush, sound-dampening carpets of the executive suites on the 23rd floor. The Sterling Tower, for all its size, becomes a giant ear at night, amplifying every creak, every distant groan of metal. But for the first few hours, nothing. Just the comforting, monotonous roar of the vacuum cleaner, a white noise against the encroaching silence. I finished the executive floors and made my way down to the 19th, where a labyrinth of marketing cubicles awaited. I was just about to start wiping down a particularly grimy whiteboard covered in half-erased brainstorms about synergy and optimizing market verticals when it happened again. Not the chime this time, but a subtle thrum, a low, almost subsonic vibration that resonated through the floor beneath my feet, distinct from the building's usual mechanical breathing. It was unmistakable. The kind of sensation you get when a subway train passes deep underground, a visceral tremor that makes the air feel thick, and it was coming from the service elevator shaft. I walked over to the bank of elevators, my cart's wheels squealing a protest against the sudden diversion from my routine. The passenger elevators remained dark and silent, as they always did. But there, down the short, dingy corridor that led to the service bay, I saw it. The small, rectangular display above the service elevator doors, which had been blank and dead the night before, was faintly lit. It glowed a soft, sickly yellow-green, and on it, a single number, 12. My stomach did a little flip. The 12th floor. I hadn't been on the 12th floor yet tonight, and according to Marco's rules, that elevator was supposed to be out of service. Locked down. Stationary. I stared at the number, trying to rationalize it away. Maybe a night watchman? But I'd been the only one here for hours. Maybe some late-night technician? Unlikely. They usually sign in with security and leave a notice. Besides, the 12th floor was just another stretch of generic cubicles and a few small conference rooms. Nothing that would warrant an unscheduled stop from the service elevator in the middle of the night. I waited. My breath hitched. The number 12 remained on the display for a solid minute, then flickered. It changed to 11, then 10, descending slowly, deliberately, each change accompanied by that faint, deep thrum, like a giant, unseen pulse resonating through the concrete skeleton of the tower. When it reached G for ground, there was a soft clunk, the sound of the elevator car settling, followed by the faint hiss of the doors opening far below. Then, silence. The display went dark. I stood there for a long moment, clutching the handle of my cleaning cart, the smell of pine sol suddenly overwhelmed by the metallic tang of unreasoning fear. It wasn't a malfunction. It felt too deliberate, too sequential. Over the next few shifts, the pattern solidified. The service elevator would occasionally activate, often around the same time each night, between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. It would ascend, often stopping at a floor like 8 or 12 or 17, linger for a minute or two, and then descend back to the ground, never going higher than 20, never lower than 5. Always in that middle range, floors I knew were empty, and always that faint musical chime, followed by the thrum. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the grime, the spills, the overflowing wastebaskets. But the building itself seemed to be pushing me towards it. One night, I was on the 10th floor, wrestling with a particularly stubborn streak on a window. The service elevator chime rang out, clear as a bell, so close it felt like it was right behind me. I spun around. The display above the service elevator doors, located just down the hall, flickered 10. It was here, on my floor. I felt a cold prickle on my skin. This was no longer just an anomaly. It felt like an invitation, or a challenge. Cautiously, I walked towards the elevator, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The display showed 10, still glowing with that sickly green light. I stood before the scuffed steel doors, expecting them to open, half dreading what might be inside, but they remained stubbornly shut. After another minute, the 10 vanished, replaced by a descending sequence, 9, 8, 7. My eyes, however, caught something else this time, something barely visible, scrawled almost imperceptibly on the lower right corner of the elevator door, amidst the decades of scratches and gouges. It looked like someone had used a nail or a sharp edge of a tool to etch something into the metal. I leaned closer, squinting in the dim light. It wasn't a name or a date. It was a series of symbols, almost like hieroglyphs, followed by what looked like numbers and letters. F8, D3, P wait, F12, no R, hold, F17, SB 5 count. They were faded, almost completely worn away, probably by countless cleanings over the years. But I could make them out. F for floor, I guessed. Then a hyphen, followed by a mysterious command. D3, no R, SB 5 count? What the hell did that even mean? My mind tried to dismiss it again. Some old maintenance joke. Or maybe a previous cleaner, bored out of his skull, had scrawled nonsense for his own amusement. It was the kind of thing you did to pass the endless hours in an empty building. But the precise, almost instructional nature of the etchings, combined with the inexplicable movements of the elevator itself, made my scalp tingle. These weren't random. They felt like rules. Rules that someone long ago felt compelled to record, even on the elevator door itself. rules for an elevator that was supposed to be out of service. The last trace of my rationalizations evaporated. This wasn't old wiring or sleep deprivation. This was something else. Something about the elevator. Something that operated by its own peculiar, unwritten code. And I had a sneaking suspicion as I slowly traced the faint lines of F8, D3, P08 with my fingertip that I was about to stumble into that code, whether I wanted to or not. The elevator, it seemed, was not just moving, it was waiting, and I was increasingly, terrifyingly, becoming aware of its silent invitations. The etchings on the service elevator door clung to my mind like cobwebs, refusing to be brushed away. F8, D3, P8, F12, no R, hold, F17, SB, 5 count. I spent the better part of the next week trying to forget them, to focus on the grime that was my actual job. But every time the elevator chimed, every time its display flickered on an empty floor, those cryptic instructions echoed in my head. They felt like a riddle, a whispered secret just beyond my understanding. My routine started to feel less like a series of tasks and more like a surveillance mission. I'd find myself watching the service elevator's display from the corner of my eye, tracking its phantom ascent and descent. It never went to the same floor twice in a row, never stayed for an illogical duration. It was consistent in its inconsistency, a ghost following its own precise, unseen schedule. One particularly dragging Tuesday night, I was on the 8th floor. It was one of the quieter floors, mostly filled with archived files and a few forgotten cubicles. The air was heavy with the smell of old paper, and dust motes danced in the slivers of light cast by my headlamp. I'd just finished emptying the last trash can when I heard it again. The chime. Soft, melodic, but this time, undeniably close. I glanced down the hall. The service elevator display, just 40 feet away, glowed a dull green. 8. It had come for this floor. My floor. And etched into the door, plain as day, was F8, D3, P8. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment I'd been both dreading and, in some morbid way, anticipating. Curiosity, that insidious little worm, finally outweighed my fear. I had to know. What did D3 mean? What was P? Wait. I pushed my cleaning cart close to the elevator doors, its squeaky wheels sounding like a protest in the profound quiet. The doors remained shut, a blank steel face. The display continued to show 8. I stood there for a long minute, just staring. Nothing happened. The air in the hallway felt heavy, thick, as if holding its breath with me. Then a thought, cold and clear, cut through my trepidation. What if the P-wait meant I had to wait? For something? Or for a prompt? I swallowed hard. D3, P-wait. It had to be a button sequence, right? Maybe a floor button? But what floor? D3 didn't look like a floor number. Unless D meant door and 3 was a count or down. This was getting ridiculous. But then my gaze drifted to the control panel beside the doors. It had the standard up and down arrows and a small, almost hidden panel underneath them, usually used for maintenance access, with a series of small, unlabeled buttons. One of them, slightly recessed and worn smooth from use, had a faded, barely visible D scratched above it, and another, a little further down, had a faint 3. My hand trembled as I reached out. My rational mind screamed at me to leave it alone, to just walk away and finish my shift. But the itch of the unknown, the lure of cracking this strange code, was too strong. This wasn't just a broken elevator anymore. It was a puzzle, and it was demanding my attention. I pressed the button marked D. Nothing. No sound, no light. just the oppressive silence. Then, after a moment, I pressed the button marked 3. A soft, almost imperceptible click came from within the elevator shaft. The display above the doors, which had still been showing 8, flickered once. Then, instead of changing to a new number or going dark, a small, blinking square appeared next to the 8. It was followed by a tiny, almost cartoonish downward arrow. And then, the doors opened. My breath hitched. They opened silently, smoothly, revealing nothing. Just the cavernous, empty interior of the service elevator. The usual worn steel walls, the grimy floor, the faint smell of oil and stale air. No phantom rider, no grotesque creature, just an empty box. But it was the way it had opened that unnerved me. It wasn't the usual hydraulic sigh and clunk. It was too quiet, too deliberate. And the sequence, pressing those 2 obscure buttons, then the blinking square, the arrow, and the silent opening. It felt less like a machine responding to a command and more like an entity acknowledging a password. I stood frozen, staring into the dark cavity. The blinking square continued to pulse next to the 8, and the small downward arrow remained. The instructions: F8, D3, P, wait. I had done the F8, D3 part. Now, P, wait. Wait for what? The silence in the shaft felt deeper now, almost sentient. I could feel the cold emanating from within the car. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was a deeper, more profound chill. A minute passed, then another. The blinking square and arrow persisted. I was half expecting the doors to slide shut again, or for something to emerge from the depths, but they just remained open, patiently waiting. My fear slowly morphed into something else, a gnawing unease mixed with a perverse fascination. This elevator wasn't just broken, it was attentive. It had a language, and I had just spoken a phrase. Then a faint, almost subliminal sensation, a shift in pressure, a subtle sway. The car inside the shaft moved, not up, not down, just a gentle, almost imperceptible lurch. It was so subtle, I questioned if I'd imagined it, like a sleeping giant shifting its weight. And then, just as quietly as they had opened, the doors began to slide shut. I jumped back, startled, bumping my cart. The steel doors closed with a soft thud, sealing the emptiness within. The display above, which had briefly shown the blinking square and arrow, now reverted to blank, dark, as if nothing had ever happened. I leaned against my cart, my heart still racing, my palms sweating. I had engaged with it. I had followed one of its strange, etched rules, and the elevator had responded. It had opened for me, shown me nothing, waited patiently, and then shifted and closed. What had I done? What was D3? What was P-wait? And what was that subtle, unsettling movement? It wasn't going to another floor. It felt more like settling, like an animal finding a more comfortable position. As I stared at the now dark, impassive doors, a new realization dawned on me, chilling me to the bone. Marco had told me the service elevator was out of service, but it wasn't. It was just operating under a different set of protocols, hidden rules known only to those who stumbled upon them. And I had just accidentally enrolled myself in the crash course. The mundane world of floor cleaning had just gained a terrifying, procedural dimension, and I had a feeling this was only the first lesson. Chapter 4, The Silent Rider. After that first direct interaction on the 8th floor, the Sterling Tower felt less like a collection of empty offices and more like a vast, silent sentinel. The service elevator wasn't just a broken machine anymore. It was a presence, watching, waiting for me to learn its lexicon. The etched rules on its door became less like graffiti and more like commandments. I spent the next few nights trying to decipher them. F12, no R, hold. F17, SB, 5 count. What did no R mean? No response, no rider, and SB 5 count. Maybe some kind of stop and burst. My mind, usually focused on the subtle art of streak-free glass, was now consumed by this mechanical enigma. The constant low thrum and occasional chime from the service elevator shaft became my new soundtrack. I'd be scrubbing a toilet on the 15th floor, and ding dong. I'd look up, knowing it was probably on 12 or 17, following its own circuit. My accidental adherence to F8, D3, P wait had opened a door, figuratively, and I felt like I was perpetually standing on its threshold. Then, about a week after my D3 experiment, I found myself on the 12th floor. It was a sterile, slightly colder floor, mostly populated by legal firms. The fluorescent lights hummed with a sharper, more insistent tone here. I was wiping down the chrome elevator buttons of the passenger bank when the familiar chime rang out, closer than usual. I looked down the dim corridor. The service elevator display lit up, glowing that sickly green. 12. My heart gave a familiar jolt. F12. No R. Hold. The rule for this floor. And this time, I was ready. Or at least, I thought I was. I walked towards the service elevator, my cleaning cart clattering softly behind me. I reached the doors, which remained stubbornly shut, despite the display showing 12. No blinking square, no arrow, just the number. This meant I had to do something. No R, hold. I muttered it to myself. No R. Did that mean I shouldn't press the R button on the panel? There was no R button. Did it mean no response? As in, don't press any button? Just wait? Hold. That implied I should do nothing. Just let it do its thing. I stood there, arms crossed, staring at the impassive steel doors. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant, almost imperceptible whine of the building's old pipes. The air felt heavy, charged. Then, with a soft, almost ethereal hiss, the service elevator doors began to part, not wide, like a greeting, but slowly, cautiously, like a reluctant eyelid opening. My eyes widened, my breath caught in my throat. Inside, standing perfectly still in the center of the car, was a figure. It wasn't a person, not exactly, more like a silhouette, a cutout of a human shape made of shadow. It was tall, lean, and utterly devoid of detail. No features, no clothing, no discernible texture, just a deeper patch of darkness against the already dim interior of the elevator. It absorbed the sparse ambient light, leaving no reflection, no hint of form, only absence. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, facing directly out, its head slightly tilted, as if listening. My blood ran cold. This was no R, no rider, or no reaction. Was I supposed to pretend it wasn't there? Was I supposed to just stand still? Every instinct screamed at me to bolt, to run down the hall and never look back. But the hold part of the instruction kept me rooted. My muscles were screaming, but I forced myself to remain motionless, my eyes fixed on the shadowy occupant. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, as if 1,000 tiny ants were crawling across my scalp. The air around the elevator felt colder, and I could smell something faint, something like ozone and dust, a scent of old, unused space. The doors remained partially open, maybe a foot wide, enough to clearly see the silhouette. It didn't acknowledge me, didn't shift its gaze. It was simply there, a silent sentinel in a metal box. A full minute crawled by. It felt like an hour. My eyes started to burn from not blinking. I could feel the tremor in my hands, the frantic thump of my heart against my ribs. Then, with the same slow, silent grace with which they had opened, the doors began to close. As they slid shut, the shadowy figure inside seemed to dissolve, not move away, not step back, but simply fade, becoming one with the deeper gloom within the elevator car. By the time the doors sealed with a soft click, there was no trace of it. The display above the doors, which had shown 12, went dark. I stood there for a long time, leaning against my cleaning cart, gasping for breath. My legs felt like jelly. My vision swam for a moment. I had just witnessed something impossible, something that shattered the mundane reality of my overnight job. A ghost? A projection? A living shadow? My mind raced. No R. Hold. I had held. I hadn't reacted. I hadn't screamed, hadn't run, hadn't pressed a button, hadn't even blinked, it felt like. And because of that, it had simply departed. What would have happened if I had reacted? If I had pressed the door open button or tried to talk to it? The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through me. This wasn't just about following button sequences. This was about behavior. The elevator, or whatever was connected to it, wasn't just moving things around. It was testing me, observing me, and the rules weren't just for the machine, they were for me. A cold, hard truth settled in my gut. I was no longer just a cleaner. I was an unwitting participant in a silent, supernatural ritual, dictated by an ancient mechanism and its unearthly passengers. And I had a chilling premonition that the consequences of breaking these rules would be far more severe than just a stern word from Marco. My new understanding had just become a terrifying obligation, one that would undoubtedly lead me to even stranger encounters. The silent rider left an imprint on me, a deep-seated unease that burrowed into my bones. The mundane quiet of the Sterling Tower was now fractured, tainted by the memory of that motionless, light-absorbing silhouette. Every creak of the building, every distant hum, seemed to carry a subtle threat. My cleaning routine became a constant exercise in hyper-vigilance. My senses stretched taut, anticipating the next chime, the next strange instruction. I found myself scrutinizing the etched rules on the service elevator door more intensely. F8, D3, P, wait. F12, no R, hold. F17, SB5, count. I understood the first two now, chillingly, but F17, SB5, count remained a mystery, a latent threat lurking on a floor I had yet to encounter with the service elevator. The phantom movements of the elevator continued, but now I watched them with a different understanding. It wasn't just a machine, it was a performer, enacting a silent play for an audience of one, and I was increasingly feeling like that audience was also a participant, destined to follow its script. One shift, around 3 a.m., I was on the 15th floor, wiping down the glass walls of a deserted meeting room. The building felt particularly oppressive that night, a thick silence that seemed to press in on my eardrums. I was just about to move on when I heard it, not the chime, but a low, guttural groan deep within the building's structure. It vibrated through the soles of my shoes, a sound like old metal under immense strain. Then the service elevator display, visible from my vantage point down the hallway, lit up, not with a number, but with a series of flashing dashes, then a quick, almost angry flicker of ER. Error? But it cleared quickly, and then it landed on a number I had never seen on that particular display before, 32. My heart slammed against my ribs. The 32nd floor, the executive floor. Marco's stern warning echoed in my ears. Don't touch the big boss's desk on the 32nd, Alex. It was the highest floor in the tower, accessible by regular staff, reserved for the absolute top brass. The passenger elevators went higher, of course, to the penthouse office on 35, but those were locked down tighter than a vault at night. The service elevator had never, ever gone above the 20th floor in my observations. My internal map of its rules had drawn a clear boundary, yet here it was, indicating a stop on 32, and there was no etching for F32 on the door. No D3, no R, nothing. It was a blank, a forbidden zone. The display held 32 for a long moment, then flickered. Not a smooth transition like before, but a violent, almost glitchy spasm of numbers. 31, 30, 29, 32. 28, 32. It looked like the elevator was struggling, fighting against an unseen force, or maybe an internal instruction. The low groan I'd heard earlier seemed to intensify, becoming a metallic shriek that echoed faintly from the shaft. Then, with a shudder that made the entire corridor vibrate, the display settled, not on 32, but on 20, and it flashed rapidly. An urgent, almost frantic pulse of light. The chime rang out, but it wasn't melodic. It was sharp, insistent, like an alarm. This wasn't a stop. This was a warning. My professional curiosity, which had driven me to press those buttons on the 8th floor, now battled with an instinctive, primal fear. The elevator was clearly agitated, but why 32? And why the frantic flash on 20? I walked towards the service elevator, drawn by an irresistible, terrifying compulsion. The doors remained shut, but the display still flashed 20, urgently, insistently. It was like the elevator was trying to tell me something, trying to communicate a critical, unspoken rule. I reached the control panel. No instructions for 20. But the flashing display and the insistent chime were a clear directive. It felt like the elevator wanted me to do something, and in my mind, a terrible thought formed. What if the rule was not to go to 32? What if it was a floor that was absolutely, unequivocally off limits? And what if I had just stumbled upon the consequences of attempting to breach that barrier? My fingers hovered over the up arrow, then the down arrow. Then I remembered Marco's fleeting comment about the big boss's desk. The 32nd floor was sacred, untouchable, and the elevator's distress suggested it knew this. Driven by a sudden chilling certainty, I pressed the down arrow on the control panel. The elevator shuddered again, but this time it was a different kind of vibration, less like a struggle, more like a sigh of relief. The frantic flashing of 20 stopped. The display went dark for a moment, then came back on, showing G for ground, followed by a faint, steady, green, upward arrow. Then slowly, deliberately, the doors hissed open. My eyes widened in horror. Inside, it wasn't the shadowy figure from the 12th floor. It was an empty space. The interior of the service elevator was bathed in a sickly, pulsating red light. It wasn't a bulb, but seemed to emanate from the very walls, throbbing with a slow, internal rhythm. And within that light, suspended in the air, were dozens of spectral, skeletal hands. They were translucent, shimmering, some clawed, some withered, reaching out, not quite touching the walls, but hovering, grasping, perpetually trying to break free. They were silent, but their collective presence was a scream. The air inside the car was thick, metallic, like a butcher's shop, mixed with something else, something fetid and ancient. My stomach churned. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet, a choked gasp escaping my lips. This was the consequence. This was what the elevator fought to keep contained. The red light pulsed faster, and the skeletal hands twitched, their spectral fingers seeming to strain towards the partially open doors, towards me. A cold, despairing moan seemed to emanate from the depths of the shaft, a sound of agony and longing. I stared, transfixed by the horrifying tableau. I could feel the cold radiating from the elevator, a spiritual frost that pierced my skin, the forbidden floor. Whatever lay behind the barrier of 32, the service elevator was a conduit for its restless hunger, and it had briefly revealed its truth. With a final desperate heave, I lunged forward and slammed my palm against the door close button on the panel, my heart hammering like a drum against my ribs. The doors hissed shut with alarming speed, cutting off the vision of the spectral hands, extinguishing the pulsing red light, silencing the faint, despairing moan. The display above the doors, which had shown G for a split second, went dark, utterly, completely dark. I stood there, trembling, leaning against the cold wall, trying to push the image from my mind. The smell of ozone and decay lingered in the air, a phantom stench that refused to dissipate. I had peered into the abyss, and the abyss had shown me a glimpse of its torment. The rule was clear. Some floors were not to be approached. Some things were meant to remain contained, and the elevator, in its silent, terrifying way, was guarding them. My understanding of the elevator's rules had just deepened into something far more terrifying. This wasn't just a schedule of movements or a code of conduct for silent passengers. This was about containment, about keeping something truly horrifying trapped within the building's hidden arteries. And I had just learned that breaking those rules meant risking a glimpse, or worse, a direct encounter, with the very things the elevator was trying to protect us all from. My job had officially become a nightmare, and I was now tasked with navigating a building that was less office tower, more prison for the unknown. The image of those spectral, grasping hands, bathed in that infernal red glow, was seared into my mind. Every night since, as I push my cleaning cart down the silent corridors, I feel their phantom touch, a cold shiver down my spine. The smell of ozone and decay, though no longer physically present, lingers in my memory, a constant reminder of what lies beyond the elevator's contained boundaries. My job, once a monotonous but safe refuge, had transformed into a nightly dance with the terrifying unknown. I still adhered to my cleaning schedule, meticulously vacuuming, wiping, and mopping, but now with a heightened, almost frantic intensity. It was as if I could scrub away the dread, polish away the memory of those skeletal fingers. But the dread persisted, a constant companion in the profound quiet of the Sterling Tower. The service elevator, after that night, became even more unsettling. It stopped less frequently on the middle floors. When it did, I was extra cautious, adhering strictly to the etched rules. F8, D3, P wait meant I pressed those buttons and gave it its due, standing at a respectful distance. F12, no R, hold meant I braced myself for the silent rider, holding my breath, eyes averted, until the doors mercifully closed. I learned to navigate its moods, to sense its warnings, to respect its boundaries. The rules were no longer cryptic suggestions. They were vital survival protocols. But the real unsettling shift began a few nights later, on what should have been a routine sweep of the 21st floor. I was in a vast, open-plan office space, the kind with rows of identical desks and ergonomic chairs. The air here was usually still, a bland mix of copier toner and recycled air. I was emptying a trash bin from beneath a desk when I heard it. A whisper, faint, almost imperceptible, like a wisp of smoke caught on a breeze. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, dissolving just as I tried to focus on it. I stopped, holding my breath, straining my ears. Nothing, just the soft whir of the fluorescent lights. I dismissed it, attributing it to my sleep-deprived imagination, still haunted by the elevator's horrors. But then it came again, clearer this time, a low, mournful sigh, like someone exhaling deeply, right behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Nothing, just the silent, empty office. The desks, the chairs, the partitions, all devoid of life. Then, a new sound. It wasn't a whisper or a sigh, but a distinct metallic clang echoing from the central core of the building, from the elevator shafts. It sounded like the clanging of old chains, deep within the building's guts, a rhythmic, dragging sound that seemed to reverberate up through the very structure of the tower. It wasn't coming from the service elevator shaft, though. This was from the passenger elevator bank. I walked cautiously to the passenger elevators, my steps tentative. Their gleaming silver doors stood impassive, their digital displays dark, as they always were at this hour. But the sound was undeniable now. A dull, rhythmic clank, scrape, clank, scrape emanating from directly behind them. It sounded like something heavy was being dragged, slowly, agonizingly, through the dark confines of the shaft. My blood ran cold. The passenger elevators were never supposed to make these kinds of noises. They were maintained, modern, and supposed to be entirely inactive at night. This wasn't the groaning of old pipes. This was something moving, something in the shaft. I pressed my ear against the cold steel of the passenger elevator doors. The sounds intensified, growing louder, more distinct. It wasn't just chains. There were other noises now. A low, guttural moan, almost like a beast in pain, followed by a series of sharp, almost frantic taps, like fingernails scraping against metal. And interwoven with it all, a faint, distorted melody, like a child's music box playing underwater. It was eerie, unsettling, a collage of impossible sounds. This wasn't contained within the service elevator anymore. Whatever was happening, whatever was the service elevator, its influence was bleeding out, seeping into the rest of the building's vital organs. The rules and the entities they governed were no longer confined to a single shaft. They were subtly expanding their reach. I remembered Marco's offhand remark about the building having quirks. These weren't quirks. These were symptoms of something far deeper, far more pervasive. As I stood there, rooted to the spot, listening to the impossible symphony of sounds from within the passenger shafts, I felt a new terror bloom. What if the rules I was learning, the rules of the service elevator, were just a preamble? What if the other elevators, the ones I used every night to navigate my lonely shifts, were now starting to acquire their own rules, their own passengers? A sudden jarring thump from directly behind the passenger elevator doors made me jump back. It was followed by a chilling, disembodied whisper, clear as day this time, seeming to emanate from the very air around me, not from the shaft. "He's late." My skin crawled. It was a child's voice, faint and reedy, filled with an ancient impatience. I stumbled away from the passenger elevator bank, pushing my cleaning cart like a shield. The clanking and scraping continued, joined now by the faint, insistent tapping and that mournful, distorted music. I could feel eyes on me, not from inside the offices, but from within the walls, from the very infrastructure of the building. The Sterling Tower was waking up, and its residents, the silent, unseen occupants of its shafts and hidden spaces, were making their presence known, no longer content to simply ride the service elevator. They were restless, their echoes bleeding into the mundane, signaling that the rules of containment were starting to fray. And I, Alex, the humble overnight cleaner, was caught directly in the cross-currents of whatever ancient, restless energy was now stirring within the building's very heart. My isolated existence was over. I was being watched, and the building was slowly, inexorably claiming me. The whispers, the clanking chains, and that chilling child's voice asking, "He's late," from within the passenger elevator shafts had shattered any remaining illusions of my job being a simple, if lonely, cleaning gig. The Sterling Tower was alive, and it was demanding my attention. My days were spent in a fog, my nights consumed by a frantic, almost obsessive energy as I navigated the building's escalating anomalies. I still had to clean, of course, but now every swipe of a cloth felt like an offering. Every vacuumed floor, a plea for quiet. The service elevator continued its strange routines, and I followed its etched rules with a precision born of terror. But the passenger elevators, once a mundane convenience, were now a source of deep unease. Their displays would occasionally flicker with impossible floor numbers. Their doors would sometimes shudder even when no call button was pressed, and the faint, distorted music box melody would sometimes waft from their sealed depths. Whatever force governed the service elevator was clearly growing, its tendrils reaching into every corner of the building. I was desperate for answers. Marco, my non-existent trainer, was useless. My supervisor, a perpetually harried woman named Brenda, who only worked day shifts, would dismiss any odd report as Alex being tired or the building settling. The internet was full of urban legends, not practical advice for dealing with sentient, rules-obsessed elevators. One night, driven by a gnawing compulsion, I decided to scour the forgotten corners of the building, the places that even regular cleaners usually ignored. My search led me to the sub-basement, a labyrinthine space of dusty pipes, decommissioned machinery, and storage lockers overflowing with decades of forgotten office detritus. The air down here was thick with the smell of mildew and damp concrete, a perfect burial ground for secrets. I worked my way through a particularly cluttered section, where broken chairs mingled with defunct server racks and stacks of yellowed invoices. Behind a towering pile of old network cables, I found it, a small, unassuming door, almost completely obscured by rust and cobwebs. It looked like a janitor's closet, long forgotten. The lock was rusted solid, but with a bit of leverage from my trusty mop handle, the ancient hinges shrieked in protest, and the door grudgingly gave way. Inside, the closet was smaller than I expected, and even more cluttered. Piles of ancient cleaning supplies, stiff, brushes, brittle sponges, half-empty cans of polishing wax with faded labels, shared space with boxes of what looked like old architectural blueprints. The air was thick with dust, disturbed only by the single, weak beam of my headlamp. As I sifted through the debris, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. It was a heavy, bound book, unlike anything else in the closet. Its cover was dark leather, cracked and worn, with no title or author visible. The pages were thick, almost parchment-like, yellowed with age, and felt surprisingly cool to the touch. It looked less like a corporate manual and more like an ancient tome. I brushed off the dust, my heart thumping with a mixture of excitement and dread. This felt important. This felt old. I found a clear space on a broken workbench and carefully opened the book. It wasn't about cleaning. It was a maintenance manual, but not for modern systems. The diagrams were hand-drawn, depicting complex pulley systems and hydraulic mechanisms that looked like they belonged in a turn-of-the-century factory, not a late 20th century office tower. And the language was strange, formal, almost archaic, interspersed with cryptic, allegorical phrases. The first few pages were standard technical specifications for vertical transport systems, detailing gear ratios and cable tensile strength. But as I flipped deeper, the text began to shift. The tone became less technical, more philosophical, even reverent. I found a section titled, "On the Due Respect of Pathways and Passages." Beneath it, a hand-drawn illustration depicted a skeletal, almost abstract figure standing in an open elevator car, its head bowed. The text was written in elegant, flowing script, but its meaning chilled me to the bone. For the tower is a living pillar, reaching from the earth to the ether, and its veins, the passages, carry not only the flesh of man, but the spirits that linger between the worlds. Great care must be taken, for these spirits are both ancient and restless. My breath hitched. Spirits? This wasn't a metaphor. It was talking about them. The silent rider, the grasping hands. I read on, my finger tracing the faded ink. The service pathway, being of the oldest design, doth retain the strongest memory. It is the keeper of the thresholds. Its movements are not of mechanism alone, but of intention. To those who dwell within, its journeys are their own, and its stops are their reckonings. The keeper of the thresholds. That explained why the service elevator felt so alive. It was conscious, intentional. Its movements, its rules, were not random. They were a deliberate function of its purpose. Then, I found a passage that resonated with an icy clarity, almost directly addressing my experiences. Certain floors are not for the ascent. To force the passage beyond its natural inclinations invites the glimpse of that which it seeks to contain. For the restless ones hunger for egress, and their torment shall be perceived by those who transgress the sacred boundaries. The forbidden 32nd floor, the spectral hands, the red light. It all clicked into place with horrifying precision. The elevator wasn't just warning me, it was protecting me from something it actively fought to contain. I turned more pages, finding references to unseen passengers and the burden of the watchman. It spoke of specific protocols for interaction. Silence is a shield, stillness a cloak, the right direction, a sacred duty. These weren't just maintenance tips. They were a liturgy of survival, a set of instructions for navigating a supernatural reality. The no R, hold, and D3P wait were not crude etchings. They were fragments of this ancient hidden wisdom. The manual even hinted at the spreading influence I'd been witnessing. Should the pathways grow weary, or should the watchmen falter, the memories may bleed. The echoes shall carry, and the silent voices shall seek new passages. For the tower's heart beats as one, and its veins are intertwined. The clanking in the passenger shafts, the child's whisper, the distorted music. The building itself was faltering. The containment was weakening. And I, Alex, the simple cleaner, had unwittingly stumbled into the role of the watchman. I closed the ancient manual, its heavy leather cover thudding softly in the silent closet. My mind reeled. This wasn't some modern quirk. This was an ancient, living architecture, infused with something truly old and powerful. The Sterling Tower wasn't just a building. It was a cage, a tomb, and a complex mechanism designed to keep something terrible locked away. And the elevators were its arteries, its sentinels, and its escape routes. My terror was no longer just about survival. It was tinged with a horrifying sense of responsibility. I understood the rules now, or at least the gravity of them, but understanding them also meant acknowledging the immense, unseen forces that enforced them. My mundane world had been swallowed whole by the supernatural, and I was now tasked with an impossible duty to maintain not just the cleanliness of the tower, but its fragile, terrifying order, lest its restless ancient inhabitants finally break free. The night was far from over, and I knew with a chilling certainty that my next encounter would demand more than just passive adherence. It would demand a choice. The ancient manual lay on the workbench, its cryptic warnings echoing in the dust-filled silence of the sub-basement closet. The keeper of the thresholds, restless one's hunger for egress. Should the pathways grow weary, my hands trembled as I reread the passages, the faint ink seeming to pulse with a hidden life. The Sterling Tower was not just a job site. It was a living, breathing prison for entities that defied explanation. And I, Alex, the lowliest of its night shift custodians, had been chosen, or perhaps cursed, to be its watchman. The revelations brought a terrifying clarity. My fear was no longer a panicked flight response. It was a cold, hard resolve. I understood the rules now, not as arbitrary dictates, but as the delicate balance keeping something truly horrific contained. Leaving was an option, of course. I could walk out, call in sick, never return. But the thought of what might happen if the watchman abandoned his post, if the rules were finally broken beyond repair, sent a shiver of cosmic dread down my spine. The child's voice, the clanking chains, the spectral hands, they were warnings, not just for me, but for the world outside these walls. That night, as I continued my rounds, the building felt different, not just alive, but expectant. The air hummed with a heightened tension, a subtle tremor that seemed to emanate from the very concrete. The passenger elevators remained silent, but their doors felt colder, their steel more ominous. I could almost hear the whispered hunger of the restless ones just beyond their surface. Around 4 a.m., I found myself on the 17th floor. It was one of the quieter levels, dedicated to a consulting firm that mostly worked remotely. The cubicles were sparsely populated during the day, and at night, it was a ghost town. I was wiping down a row of empty desks when the familiar chime, sharp and insistent, cut through the quiet. I looked down the corridor. The service elevator display lit up, glowing that sickly green. 17, F17, SB 5 count. The last uncharted rule etched on the elevator door. My stomach clenched. I had understood D3, P wait, and no R, hold. But SB on 5 count felt different, more active, more demanding. The manual's warnings about transgressing sacred boundaries resonated in my mind. Was this another test of my adherence, or something more? I approached the service elevator, my cleaning cart left behind. The doors remained shut. The 17 glowed steadily on the display. My hand went to the control panel, my eyes scanning for any button that might correspond to SB. Nothing, just the standard floor buttons, door open, close, and the mysterious D and 3 buttons I'd discovered earlier. Then my gaze fell to a small, almost hidden, unlabeled red button set slightly apart from the others, near the bottom of the panel. It was usually covered by a plastic flap meant for emergencies, but tonight, the flap was missing. The button, worn smooth from unseen use, seemed to throb faintly. My mind raced. SB? Could it mean stop burst, or suppress barrier, and 5 count? A 5-second press, or a 5-second wait after pressing? The manual had spoken of specific protocols. I looked at the red button, then back at the silent, impassive steel doors. The hum from within the shaft felt stronger now, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the floor. It was waiting. Taking a deep breath, I decided. The manual had hinted at my role, at the necessity of maintaining the order. This wasn't just a challenge, it was an imperative. My finger reached out, trembling slightly, and pressed the red button. A soft thunk echoed from deep within the shaft. The display above the doors, which had shown 17, flickered violently. It pulsed red for a split second, then cleared, and then, instead of a floor number, a series of glowing stylized symbols appeared. They were not numbers or letters, but abstract glyphs, reminiscent of the ancient etchings in the manual, swirling and morphing rapidly, like smoke. I started counting, my voice a barely audible whisper. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As I reached 5, the glowing symbols solidified. They formed a single, dominant glyph, a complex, interlocking pattern that looked like a stylized cage or a knotted knot. It glowed a vibrant, almost painful blue. Then, with a sound like a monstrous sigh, the service elevator doors slowly, majestically began to open. I braced myself, my eyes wide, expecting more spectral hands, another shadowy figure, or perhaps a glimpse into a new dimension of horror. But inside, the elevator was empty, completely, utterly empty. The interior was pristine, cleaner than I'd ever seen it, almost glowing with an ethereal, soft blue light that matched the glyph outside. The smell of ozone was gone, replaced by a faint, clean scent, like fresh rain or sterile air. The usual grime, the scuff marks, the faint smell of oil, all gone. It was like a new car, or a space that had been scrubbed clean of all earthly impurities. And in the center of the car, suspended a foot above the floor, was a single, tiny, ornate wooden music box. It was old, intricately carved and open. From its delicate mechanism, the faint, distorted melody that I'd heard echoing from the passenger shafts was now playing, clear and perfect. It was a child's lullaby, sweet and haunting. The sight filled me with an unexpected, profound sadness. This wasn't a threat. It was an offering, or perhaps a memory. The music box hummed, its melody filling the silent corridor, a beautiful, heartbreaking sound. I understood then. SB, 5 count, was not a suppressed burst. It was a soothing bridge, a brief moment of peace, a ritual of acknowledgement for whatever entity was connected to this floor, a moment where it could express its sorrow, its longing, through this artifact. And I had, for the first time, not just endured a rule, but completed a ritual. As the music box played, I felt a strange shift within the elevator car, a gentle pulse, a quiet tremor, like a heart beating. It wasn't menipy, it was accepting. After the full lullaby played, the music box stopped, its lid slowly closing with a soft click. The blue light within the elevator car faded, and the glyph above the doors dissolved into swirling smoke once more, then vanished, replaced by the blank, dark display. The doors slid shut, silently, completely. I stood there, alone in the dim hallway, the faint melody of the lullaby still echoing in my ears, a profound sense of exhaustion washing over me. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now overlaid with something else, understanding, and a heavy sense of responsibility. I had faced the elevator's rules, seen its horrors, and now I had participated in its silent rites. There was no turning back. I wasn't just Alex, the overnight cleaner. I was the watchman, a silent guardian of thresholds, an unwitting priest in a ritual older than the building itself. My job was no longer about cleaning. It was about balance, about navigating the delicate interplay between the mundane and the monstrous. The building held its secrets, and I held the keys to its silent protocols. As I turned to finally finish my shift, the silence of the Sterling Tower no longer felt empty. It felt inhabited, sentient, and reliant on my presence. The doors, once opened, could never truly be closed, not for me. And I knew with a chilling certainty that the night's peace was only ever temporary, a fragile calm before the next chime, the next rule, and the next revelation of what truly slept and stirred within the heart of the tower.